Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the world of health and wellness, where we learn how to overcome adversity to pick back for its mission and see health and fitness in a whole new light. Welcome to today's shows, guys. I hope you enjoyed the last 2 weeks of episodes. It totally wasn't planned that they kind of just went back to back, flowed into each other, and we really drove home the habits of fitness. Today's episode, we're going to have a really cool guest on who's been all over the map, and we were just chatting a little pre-show. I mean, this guy's been in everything, and we're going to talk about everything from knowing Arnold to walking through all of that stuff. We're going to dive into it. I just don't want to spoil it. But before we introduce today's guest, don't forget, we are now doing online training and online nutrition programs all through Redefined Fitness. So go check it out at www.redefine-fitness.com. Again, that's www.redefine-fitness.com. Now let's welcome to our show, Tom Touchstone. Tom, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, it's a real pleasure for me, Anthony. It's been great talking to you. I mean, I love talking fitness. I don't get so much into my career, but I love the evolution of fitness. I got to enjoy the fitness revolution through the 70s, and I'm still doing it into the 2020s and having fun. I tell people that the thing that got me in was I loved fitness. I loved exercising. I loved the way it made me feel. I loved the way it made me look. I always tell people, bodybuilding is the only sport you can wear. I tell people, I go, it's just one of the mantras. But I loved every part of it. And the older I get, I love the fact that it helps me live longer.
Yeah, that definitely couldn't agree more on that. And just fitness is helping you live longer, feel better, do more, have a better quality of life. There's just so many perks, and every day new articles coming out showing how much beneficial just daily exercise is. Mm-hmm. But we want to learn a little bit about you and figure out kind of how you even got started in this fitness realm. So take us back.
What's interesting is a lot of people ask how I got into the gig. When I'm talking about that, it's bodybuilding. And I tell people it all started after I graduated from high school. My dad told me that, and it wasn't a surprise to me. He says, current event, you've got to either pay me rent to live here or you can move. I said, give me 24 hours. I'll figure this out. And I came back the next day and I had to make sure it's the way I always am. I'm wired different. I said, so Dad, let me understand this. I can stay here and pay you money, or I can move and pay somebody else money. He goes, yeah. I go, I'm going to move to LA. My dad just told me, he goes, hey, I'll stake you for 6 months. That was a word he would be familiar with. So I moved to Inglewood, California. I was living in Inglewood, California. A lot of people here, I lived in Inglewood. I said, yes, it hasn't changed a lot since the old days. The forum's still there. But as I got involved with fitness through exercising in high school. I was involved in athletics, kind of saved my life a little bit because I was a wayward kid and some coaches took interest in me. So as I went down there, I had a neighbor that saw that I liked to work out, and he asked me if I would like to go to the gym, and I said, of course. So he took me over to the second location of Gold's Gym. As I tell people, there's a lot of picture. In the old days, it was very exclusive, very not inclusive at all. Most people would come up to the window and look in like this, where all the kind of the freaks were inside. We're in there just lifting a lot of iron. So I walked in there, and all the guys were there: Arnold and Frank Zane and Kenny Waller and Danny Padilla, and just all the old guys. You go through those names, but it was just it was a gym. It was a gym. A lot of people go, "How did they get his name, Gold's Gym?" I go, "Well, the guy that owned it was Joe Golds." And pretty soon people go, "Where do you work out?" I go, "I work out at Gold's." You just drop the Joe part, and we just it was just kind of like a family, kind of a group. It was kind of a and a lot of people refer to us as kind of a cultish experience, because back then in '76, bodybuilding was there, Muscle Beach was there, but it wasn't a hit until Pumping Iron came out. Pumping Iron came out a year year and a half after I was in the gym. I really didn't know the guys, didn't respect them for who they were because I didn't know nothing about bodybuilding. So it just started kind of a flow in my life. And a lot of times people don't realize that bodybuilding contests were different back then. They would even sometimes just shut the gym down in the middle of the day, put up two poles, put a clothesline across it, a white sheet and light. And that was bodybuilding contest to be one gym against the other. And I placed second in the teenage division. I had been doing this and tell some funny stories because the guys all approached me and said they needed a teenager in the show. And I wasn't familiar with it. So I said, what do we have to do? And they said, well, you have to shave. And I was like, oh, I'm not going there, dudes. I was like, hey, I'm out. But then they're like, no, they talked me into it. And then I said, what else we got to do? They said, you got to wear a Speedo brief. And I was like, you're not selling me. And then it got down to the oil, and I go, dude, you're going someplace I don't want to go. And they talked me into it because it was a sport that was really back gym. We were a byproduct of powerlifting. So that's the way I looked at it. And so after I placed well in the first show, had a guy in Robert Kennedy and owned Muscle Mag International. He wanted to do a photo shoot. And he wanted to do a photo shoot with me. And after it was over, he crammed, I think it was $500 in my hand. Now my rent was about $120 a month back in 1976.
Wow.
So I for just doing photos, I just got 4 months rent. I was like, why? He goes, well, I can pay you for your time. I'm going to publish the photos. They're now mine. I own them. Learned a lot about that through my career. So that's where the ride started. And then I just started competing. I started enjoying the life. Pumping Iron came out, and it was the fitness revolution. I tell people one of the things that I really remember was a lot of the guys that were in charge of the industry. Joe Weider, Joe Gold, he sold it to Ken Sprague and then started World. So I was a Gold's Gym athlete. So I kind of stayed with them. There was a lot of things in the early days that a lot of people don't talk about anymore, but it's like, what the heck? Ken was a friend of mine, and he sold it to Ed Connors, Tim Kimber, and Pete Grimkowski. And I stayed with them. So I was a Gold's Gym guy all my career. That was a sponsored athlete. And so the contest just came rolling in. And I lived the life when the AAU was sanctioning bodybuilding contests, and the NPC came in. And the NPC moved into the IFBB. I got banned. I got some titles taken away because I was competing in both federations. So then my career just rolled. Magazines were my life. There again, I was a Joe Weider, under contract with Joe Weider. And I lived that life for a decade. I can't tell you now, when people hear about it, they think it's sensational. Well, I had an 11-year marriage that was blown up by bodybuilding. Was unfaithful. That lifestyle is just not conducive for a young man, and with commitments to matrimony, and it was Hollywood. I tell people, when Gold Gym moved to its current location, every actor, every star, the Raider players were in, Kings players, the Rams players. I used to tell people most of my friends were hookers and professional athletes because we kept the same hours. We're all working out during the day and maybe doing our gig at night. So
wow,
that you may have to edit that part.
No, that's good. I mean, that's definitely something different. You don't really hear, and fitness
you don't
has
hear about
changed
the old
so much.
Yeah, you don't hear about it. You see a lot of the pictures, but I have one photo of me while they were shooting Pumping Iron. A lot of the old photographers are dying, and they're willing their catalogs or libraries to Muscle and Fitness. And we've got a friend, Bill Comstock, who's the editor-in-chief, and he keeps a lookout for some old pictures. And I always wanted one of me in the old Gold's Gym, the second location. And I think Arnold owns that building now. And there was one, and I wasn't in the movie at all. A lot of my friends were in there, and but yeah, that was my beginning. The one title, and this is kind of a funny thing because a lot of people introduce me nowadays, and I'm 64 years old, so I've been in fitness 54 years, doing it through all three of my professions. Is they'll introduce me as Mr. California. I go, oh, that was in 1985. I can't outgrow that title. Like, when I'm speaking in front of a men's group or something like that, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if I'm down in LA, because I've been doing a little more motivational speaking, just from the experience of the old days. A lot of people like to know nostalgia and that kind of stuff. They get kind of caught up with the 80s. They call it the golden years of bodybuilding. I don't know if there was a gold there, but there was a lot of memories. So when they talk about those things, I always got to bring in, it wasn't all roses. I mean, we got caught up on the PEDs. I ended up with stage 4 kidney disease. And also I've got a heart valve problem that everybody knows. And if they won't admit it, I will. I've never been shy about my anabolic use, because when I was using anabolics, there was no rules against them. You could actually get them in a UPS mail, and there was no law against them, and there was no rules saying you can't use them in athletics. I mean, it was just a free for all. A lot of the older guys were always saying that we were getting bigger and looking better than them because we were afraid of going on the needle, which they were true. We did a lot of other things that wasn't conducive for your health or your body back then. I was telling you that twice I've had a doctor. Once guy sat on my chest and gave me an injection, a muscle relaxer, what they told me, into my sternum to stop my heart from being in defib. And the only thing I was interested in, he was interested in saving my life. I was interested in my blood work because it was my potassium, sodium that were off. I just thought, hey, give me that, I'll fix this problem. And so it's the wild ride. A lot of people don't like to talk about the underside of the industry.
I mean, just knowing from back then, just from what I've seen and what I've heard over the years of being in the industry, a lot of the stigmas were around a bunch of guys being in the gym for 4 to 5 hours, lifting an obscene amount of weight. I think there were stories of doing shots of vodka, tequila mixed with some cocaine before they hop it into an exercise.
I'd say this, and because I was told this. We were the younger generation. There was an older generation, and there's a photo of me I had a Porsche, and it had the license plate Mr. California on it. And they did that photo to get a new stigma. I actually had a pair of plaid, pink and white Bermuda shorts, a polo shirt, glasses, and penny loafers. So it was a stigmatism to get away from in the gym, spitting on the floor. I love it. Everybody's got to have the right shoes now. Most people worked out barefooted or in sandals because we're always going to the beach. So as you're there, I got a funny story about the sandals too. But as you're there, it doesn't seem odd. But when you look back on it compared to today, oh my gosh, it's just a whole different world. I mean, people really then didn't even want people to join us because we wanted to slam weights around. When we're done squatting, drop them off our back, And so nowadays, if you go to Planet Fitness, they don't even want you to lift a lot of weight. It's like, hey, and I don't lift a lot of weight anymore. So those were some of the old days. It was so interesting. I got a story about going walking on the beach, and I was the young one of the group, and there were some of the old famous guys in front of me, and they had their Speedos on. That was a Eastern German thing, or an Australian and European thing, always wearing Speedos. I thought it was kind of weird because I'd wear just, basketball shorts were shorter then. We walked past some girls and they giggled, and I was young. So I started talking to them, and I asked what they're laughing for. And they said, well, we call you guys sand flippers. And I go, what do you call sand flippers for? And they say, well, those shower shoes that you guys wear? If you watch those guys, when their foot comes up, a little trail of sand shoots up. And so there was, even though we thought we were cool on Muscle Beach, some of the girls were like, oh, there goes some sand flippers because of the shoes. I didn't wear shower shoes, but a lot of the old guys were into the shower shoes on the beach.
Yeah. How was that? I just want to get a little more specifics, right? So we kind of work back to where you were in that situation growing up. How did you guys know about what you were doing? So, I mean, you're hopping into exercise, you're doing different split routines. How did you avoid injury? How did you learn? I mean, because personal training really wasn't even a thing. And if it was far from few in between. So everyone was self-taught.
Yeah. There was a guy named Vince Gironda. Now Vince had a place called Vince's Gym. Vince was an old school guy, and the gym owners they would kind of tell people what to do. I mean, the gym as we know it today, that wasn't what I grew up in. And I always tell people, even today, that you'll learn more with your eyes and your ears in a gym than you will with your mouth. And I say, if you look at a guy and you like what he's doing, you see a bicep exercise, I would try that. I'd see how it worked for me. I still promote for myself and others a brand of training called instinctual. I mean, I do it more nowadays because I got to listen to my body more, what it was able to do. But I would come in, and like you said, we're in the gym 4 or 5 hours a day. And you tell people you can't do that without great PEDs. That's one thing, Anthony, I'm not afraid to say that. I mean, a lot of people nowadays think I can look like the magazines, and you can't. I tell people you take photos 2 weeks before a show and 2 weeks after, and they use them all year long. You think those guys stay in that shape? No way. You're a fat slob in December, if you're not ready, if you're not prepping for a show. So with that, the injuries came. I'll never forget, because I tore an ACL in my right leg. I was squatting, and I got there late, and some of the guys were squatting heavy. And as they were doing it, I said, I'm not going to work out. I'll just jump in. And I jumped in around 3:15, and I felt my knee kind of wobble. It just kind of wobbled. And I go, that's weird. And the next day, it was swollen, and I couldn't walk. And so I was under contract with Joe Weider, so I got sent to Curlin Job. And I remember I heard the first words he ever told me, and he told me it many a times. I always tell my wife now, Anthony, if I go in and I'm unconscious and they do a MRI on me, only let them fix what I'm in there for, because they're going to look at me and I'm going to be a train wreck. Every insertion of my body needs surgery, just from the heavy lifting I did. I liked powerlifting as much as I did bodybuilding, so I loved lifting heavy weight. So I went to Curlin, and he told me, he goes, Tom, he goes, I could attempt to fix your knee. We're just learning about some of the rehab procedures. They'll lay your knee open. He goes, but can you afford to take 6 months off? And I go, no. I mean, I got to look like this to make money. I got contract obligations. So I told Curlin, I go, what are my options? He goes, Tom, if you can work around that and look like you do, I would advise that. So that's where we started learning. My injuries actually forced me to start figuring out I didn't have to squat to stimulate my quads. So we would start to go to some other exercise, whether it be the leg press or hack or just something different, or even dumbbells, which were able to, take the pressure off, my spinal column down to my knees. So that was a fashion of doing it, working around injuries. And I went to Curlin many a times, and he would tell me, Tom, I'm going to tell you if you can work around it. So I worked around a lot of injuries. So that was our method of figuring out. You'd find somebody who had that injury, and I would have an elbow problem, and I'd go see a guy and goes, yeah, been through that. What'd you do? It was kind of a network, but it was word of mouth. And the more people you could get around. The one great thing about Los Angeles and Gold's Gym and Worlds was it was the Mecca of fitness. I mean, they say Mecca of bodybuilding, but it was a Mecca of fitness. Everybody wanted to come to Southern California to work out at Gold's. I don't think that's the key anymore, but that's what they would want to do. So we'd get to network with everybody. Joe would bring people from Europe out, because the sport was just catching on. And so that was something you would hear what they did. I mean, that's how we came up with hundreds, is that we got around some East German powerlifters, and they were talking about some exercises they were doing, and we're like, wow, maybe we can transform that into something beneficial for our training. And I still get the credit for that one. I was telling you earlier, if you look up Tom Touchstone hundreds, the current articles will pop up. They give me credit for it.
Yeah, and that's it's a really interesting feat about kind of what that is, how the implications of it, and now knowing all the science behind how to optimize your time in the gym and how to optimize muscle growth and muscular endurance. And it's a very diverse field that I really want to dive into. But first, we're going to grab a quick break from our sponsor, guys, and we will be. For us, we know what it's like to feel unhealthy, depressed, and downright defeated. We want to show others there is a right way, and through fitness, you could do anything you set your mind to. Fitness can give you that motivation, confidence, energy you need to bridge that mental gap and prevent you from missing important life events. We understand it's about feeling better, living longer, and being good examples for our kids. We understand this because we live it. And for us, that's the redefined difference. Hey everybody, and welcome back. We got Tom Touchstone here. We are talking about a different method that he kind of gets credit for. He's calling it the hundreds method, which could be tied into the first early hit, which is high intensity interval training, or tied into more of a muscular endurance type of stuff. So how did you know, and I know you specified a lot of word of mouth, right? So you guys were in bodybuilding, the idea being your hypertrophy was your bread and butter, trying to hit that range. How did you know how to optimize for hypertrophy, or it was kind of just push my body to utterly exhaustion, take PEDs, do it again, do it again, do it again, and hope for the best?
It is trial and error. I still, as I understand my body, I still sometimes do trial and error. I'll bring in an old something, see how it works. But when we first started seeing the results of a high intensity program, we saw it with the Russians and East Germans, because they're power lifters, which were noted back in the day for winning the Olympics, that they were doing this high intensity program. There was two guys that, and when you talk about the old days, people were interested in us because we were the lab rats. People they would come to us because they knew we were crazy enough to do it. We weren't afraid of dying, literally. But there was a guy named Jeff Feliciano. If you look up Jeff has passed away now, and Jeff was there, and Jeff was kind of a educated biochemist guy, so he did a lot of the drugs, a lot of my drugs. There was another guy named Dan Duchesne. Now, Dan got the reputation of the steroid guru. Dan also is passed away now, but they both used to work for Weider Incorporated and write articles. But as we saw this, we started just dialoguing. Actually, there's an interesting thing about Dan Duchesne. ESPN wrote a book called The Steroid Nation, and Dan was giving the credits of basically starting the steroid epidemic in the 80s through that. It's out there, some publication. But we would hear this, and we would see the results. And I think that's probably the key is that you would see somebody and you like the way they look, and you could even see the Russian powerlifters, and they, even though they had large guts at the time, a lot of that's because of the weight they lifted and their abs, but you would also say, hey, they look pretty good. There's a separation in their muscle tissue. What do you guys do? And then we started catching on that they did this idea of a high intensity workout, and we just asked, what are the reasons? And they said we had an interesting effect after it. And what we experienced, and you're probably better at this than me because I'm still not learning in this area. My daughter has a master's in kinesiology, so she helps me understand some of the stuff I did. She told me, she goes, Dad, you did stuff that we know works now, but you guys didn't even know how to figure it out. So what it was they would do a high intensity repetition, and we hit it at hundreds because it took you into complete failure. And as we did that, they would tell us they would notice something after they finished, because what would happen that is almost put you in an overtraining state, and it seemed like your muscles would bundle. A lot of people will see us with striations. A lot of times the striations aren't in the muscle until you get the body fat real thin, but the muscle has been very stimulated, and so you'll see a lot of striations in the muscles that you usually don't see. So we would take the hundreds method, and they kind of saw a muscle growth when they got off, and we're like, well, heck, we'll try this thing. And so I'll never forget my friend Roy Lytlemeyer, and you can look Roy up. We did it. Now we did. You got to remember our mindset. We were doing 100 reps, and we'd split it up into 70-30, 80-20. Whatever you could get, but the weights had to go way down. When I started doing this, man, I got criticism. Some of my biggest critics were the Barbarian brothers, Dave and Peter Paul, You can look those guys up. We'd walk in the gym, they're lifting heavy duty, or the Minster brothers, Mike and his brother. So you would walk in, everybody's still lifting heavy duty, and we're coming in and we're dropping the weights way down, because if you try to do 100 barbell curls with even 25s on there, you're going to fail around 40 or 50 reps. So the idea was it took you into a way, you stimulated your muscles. The thing that you had to do was work past the pain barrier. We realized that real quick. So Roy and I started duct taping our hands to the equipment. And so when we did that, we would say, you can't put it down till you finished it. And Roy brought in a cattle prod one day. And so the old cattle prods were about this long. They had D batteries and about 8 of them. And so our idea was, if you got to the point where you were failing and you were like 50 reps, you would get a shock. And that would stimulate you to continue on. I'm serious. You could see it in the original article of Hundreds in Flex magazine. And so we would push ourselves through the pain barrier. When I tell people to do hundreds, there was a gym called Flex It Gym in Fountain Valley. A guy named Fred Newell owned it. We did a lot of hundreds there. There was a trash can in the middle, and you'd have people go, "What's that for?" I go, "You'll find out." So after doing 100 repetitions through your legs, most people would vomit. And that trash can was kind of a badge of courage. But that's the mentality that we had. So we learned through that trial and error. We learned through just gutting out, because we weren't afraid to go past the pain barrier. We weren't afraid of what it would do. But then we started seeing the results. And then we started saying, how many times a year can we do this with certainty that we won't, like you said, injure a muscle group? Because we started getting into some pretty crazy weights as you started moving, in hundreds, because your body will adapt to it and it'll get stronger. So a lot of it's trial and error. But there again, I learned more with my eyes and my ears than I did with my mouth. If I saw somebody and they could do it, we would kind of lean that way.
Very interesting. Kind of just, and it's funny because that's what a lot of fitness stuff is now, is through trial and error. And as much as people want to say, well, it's physiology, kinesiology, this is how your body moves, this is the muscles you're working, moving to those joints. And yeah, that's true. But we're learning so much more about how to get nerves operating again, how to get people moving in certain motions they never moved before, what the effects of under and overactive muscle stimulation is at the same time. Like all that stuff, and a lot of fitness is still in its infancy. It hasn't been proven yet to really show that it works or doesn't work. Like the idea we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, your body adapts and learns through stress. And this is something I've always believed in, where you need to be put into a physically, mentally stressful situation. And then one of two things is going to happen. One, you're going to totally freak out and have a breakdown. Or two, if you're mentally prepped for that scenario, you're going to be able to figure out a way, and your brain's going to wake up and say, hey, we need to do this to get through this. A good example is a client who I work with who couldn't walk or stand. And we started with just standing. He kept telling me, I can't stand. I can't stand. I can't stand. I was like, yes, you can. He's like, I can't stand, Anthony. They told me I can't stand. I'm like, we're standing. So you get him up and you put him. He's like, I'm going to fall. I was like, I know. I'm like, you're going to fall. You're not going to get hurt. Obviously, I took all the precautions to make sure he didn't get hurt at all. But you're going to stand. And if you don't try to stand, you will fall. And it will be embarrassing. Okay. And guess what? He figured it out and he stood. Mm-hmm. And then we took that method. We did it again for walking. And then we did it again. And we did it again. And that's how his body, because it's a lot of nerve issues he's had, started sending those signals again, saying, oh my God, panic mode, body in danger. Let's do this and let's push through. So that's my point being with the story, is that we learn through trial and error. We learned through figuring out the amazing things that our body can do. And we still don't know. You hear stories of people doing the absolute craziest things in the world, like hiking Mount Everest without equipment. Like you just, what? it just blows your mind what we're actually totally capable of doing when our mind set that position.
I agree with you 100%. And if you're out there and you're going to try hundreds, I mean, one of the things that you have to get rid of is your ego, because, I mean, every person I've ever known, when they've tried it in the beginning, they'll grab a weight that they think they can do and they can't do it. I mean, if you're going to start out and you're going to do 100 bicep curls with dumbbells, you better be looking at the 5s and maybe the 2.5s. After it just, the lactic acid builds up. And I'll never forget when my friend Rory walked into the gym with the cattle prod. And I go, "What's that for?" He goes, "That's to help us go through the pain barrier." And I was like more pain? He goes, "Let's just try it." And I'll never forget one day Roy was doing barbell curls, and he was doing it, and he was, we used to have a clicker too. And you would, because you get lost in the numbers, and whoever's doing the exercise gets kind of mad because you want credit for every rep. And if you didn't hear the clicker sound, you're like, what was wrong with that rep? And so you would almost have like a little marital conflict right there because you didn't hear the clicker. I mean, you're getting to 78. You want every count for every rep after that. And if you don't do a complete rep, you don't get counted. And so I remember we were doing it and I didn't click it. He goes, "That was a good rep." I go, "No, it wasn't. I'm doing it. So keep going." So I sat there and I put the cattle prod close to his face. And he goes, "Don't touch me with that." And I didn't mean to, but I did. And he was just struggling. And the minute he put it down, he just was like, bam, 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 bam. He finished. He goes, "Cut me loose," because we'd have to uncut the tape. And I was like, I gave everything to a friend of mine. I said, once I get in my car, cut him loose. because it pushed him through anger and mad. I mean, and he got the final reps. The body, I think, is, what do they SEALs say, that once the SEAL team training, once you get to that point where you feel that you can't go any farther, your body's holding 40% in reserve, and how do you get that out? You got to go past that barrier. So that was one of the things that people would just, I'm telling you, I got bored of talking about hundreds after the Flex article came out, because that's what everybody wanted to talk about. And it's funny because I would tell people, I go, it's a theory. It's not proven. I mean, you got one to the next. And then a lot of people say, well, it doesn't work. And it's like, well, there's no instruction manuals, because all they had was what I had wrote in Flex magazine. And Dan Duchesne did the article in Flex, and then Jeff did it in Muscle and Fitness. So all they had, that was what I did. And so people would ask about it, they'd try it, and they said, "Oh, that's a bunch of junk, but it didn't work." I go, well, and I tell people to this day, man, you like you said, the body will adapt. That's one of the greatest things I think that we have here. And I think as a fitness person, and I tell people, anybody that comes in to work out, your clients, if you build muscle tissue, you're a bodybuilder. I mean, it's like you're building your body. And so we always got the negative side of it, because we stand in bikini briefs with oil on. And so there's a negative connotation to it. But I say, anybody who comes in to work on their physique is a bodybuilder. And so I say, I try to change my workouts every 3 to 4 weeks, because I think my body's adapting at that time. So that's a rule of thumb for me. As I go in, I'll train. And I tell people, I go, sometimes I'll just go back to front instead of front to back with the exercises. I trained before I came in here today, and I went in and I just, I usually do back and arms. I went arms and back. So just changing it. So I love your thought about saying, I got a client that I push through, and it is going to hurt. You are going to fall, but you're going to get stronger, and you're not going to fall as hard tomorrow, or you're going to be better. And that's hard to explain to people. People are like,
Yeah.
I don't want to. People always say, "Well, I don't want to look like you," and I go, "Don't worry, you won't." It's like, because a lot of people don't want to push themselves through that, right? I mean, and that's why early days people, women would come up and go, "I want to work out, but I want to look like a guy." I go, "Don't worry, you won't. You don't have the right hormones, and you're not going to push yourself hard enough, but you can be the best you." And physical fitness gives self-confidence. It helps you with just the way you look, so that gives you a better mental state, unless you're coming off of a anabolic thing, and then it's in your head.
Yeah, and I want to ask actually a specific question relating to that, something outside the gym. So I've learned, and one of the biggest reasons I do a bunch of Spartan races, and I do your 100 reps, actually. I try to see how little sets I can get it in. But it's always, all right, I thought I could only get 60. I ended up pushing all the way through and got the 100. So then I apply that to outside the gym. And
Yeah.
that's something I've learned. I think it's the biggest helpful. It's in business life. I've learned I can get to 80%. No, I have 20% left. And you learn to push through more stressful situations and adapt better in every matter outside of the gym, just from doing things that you did while you were exercising. Has that been true for you as well?
It is, Anthony. And I know I have my friend and producer, Mike Harvey, with me. We have about 4 shows that we do on the internet. We started learning in the beginning that after doing 2 shows, we were wore out. And we thought, well, it's like working out because we can do, right, Mike?
Yeah.
Because, well, if we can do 2 shows, we can do 3 shows. Now, if we can do 3 shows, we can do 4 shows. And so we film our YouTube shorts. And the other day I came in and I shot 12. So so we kind of do that with each other. And there's something that I really like to tell people. And nowadays I'm a loner, but it used to be when I worked out, I needed somebody to push me. When I talk about I worked out with all these guys that are a lot better bodybuilders than I, went farther than I. They would always do something. They always have a young guy with them. And I would always wonder why they were doing that. Until I got older, you need somebody young with that energy to push you through it. So it's a benefit of having a training partner or a trainer like you, Anthony. Somebody's very wise if they hire you, because when they're doing what you're telling them to do, they don't have to think about what you're thinking about. You're keeping their momentum going. You're thinking about what's next. So the younger guys would always. So I started getting toward the end of my career. I started getting some of the younger guys to work out with me, because if I didn't want to squat 3 1/4 that day or 405, they were going to do it. So it motivated me to do it. So there are certain things, like you said, that as you transfer out of the fitness world, that can come into another industry or another idea, and you could take it over. I mean, you could put that same application towards that. And I do think that people that go into the gym find a love for it. They find out that it helps them with that side of it. I talked to a lot of people that are sedentary, and man, there isn't anything better to see than somebody come in and say, I lost my first 5 pounds. I can go to the ground and do something, and I never was able to do that, whether it's pulling weeds or painting something, but they're attributing it to exercising in the gym.
Yeah, and it's an amazing thing.
Well,
Seeing people be
again,
like do things that they said I couldn't do before, and I'm doing it. I'm like, that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. It's funny how it's funny. I joined into the push-up challenge. I had a couple people challenge me. We had that 2,200 push-ups in the month of July coming around, so I did it. And the first day I did push-ups, I did 30, and I was like, oh no, because I hadn't done push-up in 30 years. But I've been exercising. But I wasn't using that muscles. And so I ended up increasing and increasing. And at the end of the month, I ended up doing 200 more than the 2,200. But I realized I don't want to quit doing those. It almost brought me back to a good point where it says, I just don't, some push-ups now are in my everyday workout now. I don't want to go back where I only could do 30 and I was wore out. I want to do them regularly, and I want to be able to do some more body weight things. I had a friend that challenged me to do some pull-ups. Like, I can't do one now, but there was a day when I could do a lot of them. So I go back to apply it. Like, what else am I not doing? What else? I talk to a lot of people who are getting older, because I'm elderly. I have an AARP number, and I tell people who are older, I go, you could still do this stuff. You could still work out. And they go, well, I'm not like you. And I go, well, you don't have to be like me. You could be the best version of you. And exercising, I think, transfers over into so much in life. I really do.
I couldn't agree more. And that was actually my next question anyway. It's really funny. You went right there. But how has exercise helped you outside of being in the gym? How has your career being in the fitness industry kind of transcended through your other careers of IT ministry to what you're doing today?
Well, it gave me the good work ethic. It taught me I had to work hard. I mean, lifting and hefting weight. I mean, a lot of people know that you can't have big muscles without some intensity. So you do need to put your muscles under some stimulation. And I went into the IT field, and I got there again. I got to ride another revolution out. The IT field was coming on in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, and so I tell people that there was some new branding that needed to be done. I used to work on a lot of IBM 360 mainframes. When they first started delivering them, they didn't have an operating system. You could turn them on, but there wasn't a lot else they would do until they were programmed to do it. So so you started coming out with some ideas and techniques like we did sets and reps. You just started having these ideas. I programmed in a language called ALC, assembler, and Fortran, because those are machine languages. You don't do that anymore. But I mean, it was cool to be part of the beginning of something new. And so being able to transfer that ability and knowledge from fitness into the IT world, that was something. Then when I came into the ministry, which I've been in for now 27 years, I realized that ministry was a business, even though it was spiritual, had a spiritual influence. I'm the executive pastor at the church I'm at. We have churches in Vegas and in Los Angeles and Bakersfield. So I started realizing that I could compartmentalize like muscle groups. I could start working, I got a church in Vegas that has the same requirements as Bakersfield. So you can compartmentalize it because you're going to have a youth ministry, you're going to have a kids ministry, you're going to have adults, women's. So you started almost like muscle groups, and I always relate business to fitness. You've got to keep stimulating yourself. You have to keep trying. You got to keep up. That's one thing in your industry. I'm so glad that I'm not having to do that now, because like you said, it is so new. And there's so much new that's coming out that you deal with. I mean, like you said, I always talk to my daughter because this is her academia. And she just tells me, she goes, Dad, it's growing out, like you said, every day. I tell people biceps do this, triceps do that, shoulders do this, but there's so much more complexity in that. Then you have the nutritional field, which, are they lying to you? Are they telling you the truth?
Most
Is
of
it
the time, yes.
is it safe to take? It's like, that's a question I get now. I go, I don't know. I used to be able to read labels and figure out if they're having hormones in it or not. I can't even do that anymore. But I'm just saying, I think that what you have to do is find out what's best for you. And you tell people that. I've got a very good bodybuilding friend that went much farther than I did, and he didn't have great genetics. I was blessed with genetics. That's one thing. I've always been heavily muscled. I can get big. I can get my muscles are separated. You tell that to people. A lot of people are like, "Can anybody be a bodybuilder?" I go, anybody can build their body. If you're talking standing on the stage, winning at a high level, that takes genetics. You're gifted from your parents, and you're coming down, because anybody can build their body. But if you don't have great muscle insertions, full muscle bellies, it's hard. So I had a great friend that went on to win the universe, and he really was challenged with genetics, but he went on to blow the fitness world away. But he had to push hard, maybe harder than us. But that's the thing that I do now with business. I knew nothing about the ministry. People ask me now, did you go to theology seminary? I go, no. I just applied some skills I did when I was working out. I just worked hard. I just figured I got to find a different way to do it, and I got to separate things. And it's one of the things that I do to this day when I'm telling the younger guys. I go, you got to find a way to be able to see all the ministries have the same components, but some are with kids, some are with women, some are with men, some are with both. And you just have to figure out how to make it work. And that's what you do, right? You work out with women. I'm sure you work out with kids. I'm sure you work out with men at all ages. And
Everything far few in between.
yeah. And so that's how I think I've applied that fitness to business. And I think it's that same mindset that makes you grow. Is if I've got to stimulate my muscles differently every 4 to 6 weeks, I have to do the same thing with that. Reading is a great way, and I still think learning more with your eyes and ears than your mouth in any profession helps.
I couldn't agree more. I want to ask you, what would you say is one, your biggest regret doing what you did then, and what would you change? And two, what's something you would never change that you're really proud of?
I can answer both those. I wish I would have exhausted my teenage years. I really do. I had a few things. I had my president of a Gold's Gym bought me a belt buckle that said Mr. America, and he just said, Tom, fill in the date. And it was something I placed runner up at the USA in '86. And I never hit that, but I felt if I wouldn't have jumped out of my teenage years too quick, I started competing in open shows and winning them. And so you can't go backwards. It was just a mindset. I wish I would have. There was people that told me that. There was people that said, Tom, you should have probably just grown up a little slower. But I also looked back at the industry. The industry pushed me because they were looking for some younger guys because all they had were that middle-aged guys, and they're like, we can't build it around this, so we need some young guys coming up, and then on. So that was something I wish I would have done is finish that. The one thing that I never regret, my brother, I remember I had a big success for me. I did the '87 Nationals, and I was in the light heavy division, and it was a big year. Sean Ray won the light heavies in the overall, but I placed 11th. The big thing that I tell some people now, and I don't get that publicized a lot, is I went into that show and I did 0 anabolics. I did growth hormone. So back then, growth hormone was a new thing. But I went in, so I felt that I placed 11th in a national show where everybody's juicing. And I went in and I had a trainer named Glenn Birkenkamp. And I told Glenn, I want to do something I've never done. I want to see how good my physique is. How can I compare to the guys that are up there, but if I don't use any anabolics? And I placed 11th. Now, what was bad for me is they were testing that year, and nobody in the top 10 wanted to go on to the universe, and I was clean. I was so excited I would have gone on, but you had to place in the top 10. I placed 11th, which was a personal victory. So the next day I called Joe Weider and I just told him I'm out. And Joe told me, he goes, Tom, everybody tells me that you'll be back in. I go, no, Joe, I got an education. And I go, oh, by the way, I know I have 2 years on my contract, but if you want to take pictures of me, I'll be a fat whale. And he was just like, it was a breakup. And I'm glad my brother got a hold of me and he said, Tom, why not go out the best you have ever been? And I was like, well, how can I do that? I'm not competing. I have nothing pushing me. He goes, why don't you just do that, do the photo shoots and come out with some integrity. And I did that. And some of the pictures that I took at the end, and I never stood on stage again for those next 2 years, were some of my best. And I am so glad I didn't burn the bridge. I'm so glad that I listened to my brother. He let my integrity speak for itself. And it's so funny. I mean, my friend bought a Kerner, a later edition of Muscle Fitness, probably in 2015, and there was some photos of me in there, but it was from that last photo session. And I was able to take pride in that. So from the '87 Nationals, I was excited that I did it anabolic free, not drug free, anabolic free. And I was able to place high, not high enough. And I think, if I can say this, I think that's where God had a different plan for me. If I went on to the universe, I'd have probably stuck in the industry longer, which would have been negative for me. So I'm glad I got out then. I'm glad it worked out the way it did, but I'm glad I fulfilled my commitments, and I can look back and say I did what I was supposed to. I didn't burn bridges, and I jumped into a second career. And those are the things that I still carry with me to this day, Anthony. I still believe in that. Don't burn bridges. Keep going. So that was something I thought I felt good about getting out in, and my regret is I wish I would have used up my teenage years before jumping into the open division.
That's awesome story. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Tom, I want to start wrapping this up. So I'm going to ask you the final 2 questions I ask everybody. The first question is, if you were to summarize this episode in 1 or 2 sentences, what would be your take-home message?
My take-home message for the audience out there is you just heard from a guy that's lived 52 years in fitness. A lot of regrets. My anabolic, there is no quick way to get good results. Don't cheat. I mean, I tell people there's no shortcuts. Everything costs. You think it's free? I'll do whatever it takes to get here. I'll go buy the edgy supplements. I'll do that. It's not worth it. I'm telling you, when people hear my career, the one thing I tell them, when young kids come into this day, I tell them, I'm not the guy to talk to because I may taint where you want to go. And I don't want to ruin that for you because I don't want to blow it. But I go, there is no rainbow or pot of gold at the end. Trust me on this one. In the competitive arena, the benefit comes. So that's what I would take away. The benefit comes from fitness works. I've started it when I was 11 years old, and I'm still doing it at 64. I've got a few health problems because of the knucklehead years, and that's what I wouldn't do if I was you. But I know people, sometimes they'll say, "Oh, you're an old has-been," which I said, well, at least I was something. To be a has-been, I had to be something. So I just say, hey, there are no shortcuts, and you'll be blessed if you don't try to take them. Engage with a professional like Anthony. Let them help you. Just don't learn, because you'll avoid a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? And then second question to ask everyone, the easiest one of all, how can people find you, get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
My email is tomltouchstone@gmail.com. We have the 511 Media Group, and we YouTube channels. So I'm part of that. My friend Mike lets me say I'm the co-executive producer for those shows. That's very fortunate. But so you can reach us through 511 Media Group or tomltouchstone.com.
And thank you guys for joining us on this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is medicine. Until next time.